The financial needs of a business go beyond tax and attest services. That's why CTBK goes beyond accounting services and offers outsourced solutions through their affiliation with CFO Solutions Plus. These additional services allow clients to focus on their operational and long-term strategic goals. Trust CTBK's outsourced solutions to provide cost-effective, value-added financial services tailored to your company's needs. Call CTBK at 716-630-2400. Again, 716-630-2400. Or go to ctbk.com to learn more about CTBK's outsourced solutions.
Welcome to a remix edition of Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and Business Consultants. I'm Tim Graham of The Athletic, joined once again, second day in a row, by Matthew Fairburn of The Athletic. He covers the New England Patriots, used to cover the Buffalo Bills for many years, so he can speak about the AFC East all day long. Matthew, thanks for doing this again.
Yeah, this is like a mulligan from our golf show yesterday.
There were some, I think I'm letting myself off the hook by calling them technical difficulties, although there was a microphone issue in which we could hear both you and Jonah Javad quite clearly. I was in turn one of the Kentucky Derby, and you guys were in the backstretch. I needed to shout or something, but we're going to do this again because we talked about a lot of fun stuff that there's probably no way in hell anybody made it to the end of that mess yesterday. If you were able to sit and listen to Matthew and Jonah, it was a great conversation. It was my long-windedness from a
distance. You were off.
I was
speaking.
I was far away, but not shouting.
Now I can almost hear an echo.
Is that right?
Actually, not anymore. I heard it for a second. This is a professional operation right here.
Almighty.
Picking up where we left off.
This is Tim Graham and Friends, formerly brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and Business Consultants. Matthew, we talked about some fun things yesterday if you're a Buffalo Bills fan. Number one, you know what? We didn't talk about the Bills much. We talked about the Patriots. So let's back into this a little bit. Let's give a little fresh material off the top before we delve back into New England Patriots fans and their side-eye glances that they're giving to Bill Belichick these days. And also to your, we'll also talk about your thoughts on Northeastern goalie Devon Levi, who has been on the minds of Sabres fans recently. You saw him play. You've been following his career because you're based out yonder. But first, what are your thoughts on these Buffalo Bills so far this offseason? The Von Miller acquisition, the Stephon Diggs extension, Roger Saffold, the departures on the coaching staff. I guess from a holistic standpoint, do you think the Bills have gotten better than they were in 2021?
I would say so. I think Brandon Beane continues to show that he is among the best general managers, I think, in football. He's in the top tier of general managers. He's among the class of GMs that clearly knows what they are doing. And there's another class of general managers in the NFL that continue to trip over themselves. And after years of Bills fans dealing with that group of general managers, they have one who is smart and appears to be taking advantage of the team's window, but also taking advantage of this positive momentum they have from a reputation standpoint and adding talent to the roster. I don't know that they're necessarily getting major discounts on any of these players. You know, Von Miller probably doesn't consider the Bills 3 years ago, but he also probably doesn't choose the Bills this year if they don't offer the contract that they offered. So they have a better reputation, but it's not reputation alone that's winning them these things. And they're going for it. So it has been a headline grabbing offseason, I think, for the Buffalo Bills, and one that I've been somewhat surprised how quickly in the minds of fans, this offseason has helped turn the page from how the season ended, because I think the main question still about this team is how they'll perform, or maybe not even how they'll perform, how the head coach will perform in those big moments. And that, I think, is the next chapter of this Bills team, because they now have the quarterback. They have arguably the best quarterback in football right now, one of the top 2 or 3. They have a loaded roster, as loaded a roster as you can have when you have that quarterback and you're about to pay him big money. And you could argue they should have won the Super Bowl last year. And if not for a calamity of errors that started, with their head coach. And that's a couple years in a row and in a few big spots where I think that has been the case, not to that level in 2020, but, so they've now reached the point as a franchise where they have to ask themselves, not necessarily is it Super Bowl or bust, because when you have Josh Allen, you'll be in the mix for, on a yearly basis if he keeps playing the way that he's been playing. But what pressure, lands on the coach and others when you don't hit that goal? Because 2 years in a row, they were, a legitimate contender for the Super Bowl and came up short. So
is it fair, Matthew, in that vein, to also include the playoff loss in Houston?
I think
or is
so.
that too far removed?
I think that's fair to include because it's part of the record and it was a blown lead. And I think you get a pass on that one if you're Josh Allen in your first start. He did not play well down the stretch in that game, but the blown lead was, tough, I think, for people to swallow. They weren't a legitimate Super Bowl contender, most likely that year. But once you're in, you never know. Weird things have happened.
I mean, missed out on an opportunity of the Super Bowl. I mean, more along the lines of Sean McDermott's inability to get the car in the garage with a fairly comfortable lead. Most teams would think.
I think it adds to his, whether you would add it to a list of, shortcomings for him, I think it builds the picture.
But you'd like to think that is also ancient history. Younger coach has, the arc of his career development is going to rise a lot more steep. So maybe you think, well, okay, Sean McDermott's not even close to being the same coach he was back then, but yet,
some similar things end up happening.
The last game they played, they had 2 leads after the 2-minute warning.
Yeah, I think it's part of it because they haven't quite gotten over the hump. And he has been a coach, I think, since the beginning, or, since he started coaching with the Bills, that has learned a lot from his own mistakes and has corrected some of his early errors and, lapses in philosophy or judgment. He has been willing to change and adapt. And I think that's to his credit. And those types of moments are, crazy pressure packed snap second moments that can start to define your career. We were at the owners meetings a couple weeks ago, and I think this is where the national picture of what the Bills are is a little bit different than how people understand it, who understand the market and understand the franchise and where it's been. Because I had a few people ask me if, they thought, or if I thought that, if the Bills missed the playoffs or if they slipped up, if McDermott was under any sort of pressure. And I don't believe that at all. I don't think he's under that. I think he puts himself under a tremendous amount of pressure. And I think, he certainly has the urgency to get it done. I just don't think ownership is even remotely close to thinking that they need a different head coach. Things can change really fast, but where they were and where he and Brandon Beane have gotten them has built him a nice long runway to correct some of those things. They're still, I think they still have the quarterback, they still have the core in place, the window is still open, but missing opportunities stings when you're watching, the Bengals, get to the Super Bowl, right? When second-year quarterback, young head coach. That's where you can excuse some of that stuff away. But then when you see these other teams with the same perceived shortcomings of inexperience, young quarterback, making it happen, they're missed opportunities that you don't get them back. You might get other ones, but you don't get those ones back. And, the AFC is getting tougher. And so I think still probably multiple years away from legitimate pressure for McDermott. You saw, it's like Andy Reid in Philadelphia, going to all those championship games and never quite making it happen for the Eagles. It took a long time, because if you stay competitive and you stay in the playoffs, and that was in Philadelphia, in Buffalo, where I think Terry Pagula and Kim Pagula are very proud of what they've done with the Bills, rightfully so. And they're proud to have gotten that hire right. And they have gotten a lot of those coaching hires wrong with both of their teams. So I think this is the group they're going into, the season with for years to come. And they think the odds are in their favor that one of these years, everything will click. But to me, that's the biggest question with the Bills, because that is where things left off, right? That's what doomed them in the playoffs. Wasn't talent. It wasn't a specific position where you said, man, if they had more of this, a better pass rush would have helped, but they couldn't have played a better football game. Certainly the defense could have held up better at the end. But that wasn't, talent wasn't the problem. The quarterback played as well as almost any quarterback has probably ever played in the postseason. So, between the end of the season and now, have they gotten better? Yes. I'd say marginally, because they were already really good.
Aspect of it, I don't think that we can assume that that Josh Allen will not experience an adjustment phase without Brian Dable, without Shea Tierney, without other support staff around him. Yes, they're bringing back Matt Barkley, and Mitchell Trubisky was there for only a year, so I don't think that they got that closely attached. But Davis Webb obviously was a big enough loss that the Bills were willing to make him their quarterback's coach to keep him close to Josh Allen. That didn't happen because, well, for obvious reasons. Davis Webb wants to continue as a football player. The money, even as a deep backup quarterback, is way better than as an assistant coach. And coaching will be waiting for him when he's done with his playing days. But I think that just goes to show, and also through the comments that Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane have made, is that keeping their quarterback as comfortable as possible. And that doesn't mean from an offensive line standpoint. It means from a Tuesday through Saturday standpoint. They recognize that as incredibly significant, and there is a large void of those voices that are going to be around him on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, not just the voices, but I would just on Sunday alone, the play calling. People love to play Monday morning coordinator with what Brian Dable did, on Sunday. But I don't think you can argue that he was a major positive for Josh Allen in this offense over the last handful of years. And, Sean McDermott's pretty hands off with the offense, and, talking about learning from his
He has been
true
hands off with the offense. And with Brian Dable not there and a first-year offensive coordinator, a first-time play caller, is Sean McDermott going to be tempted to get involved there, whereas he wouldn't with Leslie Frazier? Well, hell, he did with Leslie Frazier.
And
he
actually,
took the play
did
calling away from Leslie Frazier. Of course, Sean McDermott has the wherewithal, the backing of a defensive experience to do that. But we know that Sean McDermott would get prickly at times regarding his evaluations of Brian Dable's calling of run versus pass and the balance there in the offense. So if you have Sean McDermott's thumb on the scale when it comes to the offensive play calling, even if it's just a bit, that could be a significant change.
That's a good point. I was about to say I'd kind of forgotten about how impatient Sean McDermott got with Brian Dable at times, and how by the end of last season, there was, I don't know if you would go as far as to call it a rift, but, there was some tension, I think, between those two. Certainly a little bit more public criticism from Sean McDermott than we would expect. So, yeah, I think that's something to watch because, like I said, I don't think he's coaching for his job or anywhere close to it. But all of the pressure that starts to mount with expectations, I'll be curious to see how he behaves with all of that. Like you mentioned, is he going to get more involved on offense? Is he going to feel a need to, pressure Ken Dorsey to be a little bit different? I think the way they ended the season on offense, you would think that nobody would want to touch a thing. Just let Josh Allen do what he does. But how much that Brian Daboll loss is felt is going to be a major storyline, I think, because yes, Ken Dorsey keeping him in the mix, I think was a big deal, but you don't know what he's going to be like as a play caller. You don't know if he'll be as effective. That is a very difficult skill in the NFL and one that, I don't think comes easily for everybody. And Joe Brady is a nice get in theory as the quarterback's coach, but I don't really know what went south in Carolina. And, I know he's a bright name, a name that people know because
the guy got 5 head coaching interviews last year.
He was a hot name. He was a
and then all of a
legit
sudden
hot
he's out of
name.
work and he's the quarterback's coach. He's the Bills' second choice for quarterback's coach.
So in theory, I think he's definitely a good quarterback's coach, given what you just mentioned, that he was, pretty close to being a head coach.
Yeah.
But who knows?
Plan B.
Who knows, right? I mean, we don't really know exactly how good of a quarterback's coach he'll be, how well that relationship will work with Josh Allen. A lot of variables there. He'll be comfortable with Ken Dorsey. He's also already developed as a quarterback. So I think that's a big deal. This isn't 2 years ago where I think we're beyond the point of asking the question.
Are you saying it's safe? It would have been safe to bring back David Culley?
David Culley, I think, would have been a bridge too far. I think that could have caused a bit of regression. Josh would have been having flashbacks to 2018. He would have been launching the ball downfield to Reggie Gilliam. He would have had some strange impulses to pitch the ball. So I don't think I would have gone that far, but I think we're beyond the point of people wondering whether he's good or whether he's going to regress. Or, of course, there's ebbs and flows in every career. He could have a down year, but there's still a foundation there that Brian Daboll helped build that I think will serve him well, regardless of who's the quarterback's coach and the offensive coordinator. But play calling is a big deal in the NFL, and not everybody's very, really good at it right away. So how the offense adjusts, whether there is a bit of an adjustment period, some new receivers, not having Cole Beasley as the security blanket, not having Emmanuel Sanders, a little bit of, shake up on the offensive line. This is that next stage of, Josh Allen's career where he's now the one elevating everybody else. He still has a lot of talent around him. He still has Stephon Diggs, but they're in that window of get it done now because Von Miller's locked up for 3 years. Are you going to get 3 good years out of him? Is he going to be worth that number 2 years from now? We'll see. Stephon Diggs is locked up on a huge contract. You're not going to have as much financial flexibility depending on where the cap is. So that's where I think the urgency exists, not for Sean McDermott's job, for his window to get the ultimate prize and to validate everything that they've done. He deserves all the credit in the world for getting them to this point. And I think he might be the biggest variable for them getting from where they are to being a Super Bowl team. And now they're going to go into the season as a Super Bowl favorite, not just a Super Bowl dark horse or a darling Super Bowl pick. They're going to be one of the favorites to win it. They're going to show up in a lot of preview magazines, or if magazines still exist, preview articles on the
remember those
on the internet. I imagine if we do a roundtable panel of athletic writers the Bills will be a popular pick to represent the AFC in the Super Bowl, even with all the talent in the conference. But it is a tough conference. So I think they're in a fascinating stage of, their, I don't even want to call it rebuild because everything's already built. They're just in a fascinating stage of the franchise and of their respective careers. But I think Brandon Beane has done everything you could have asked a general manager to do coming off that type of loss in the playoffs, because he has aggressively addressed a few spots that were problems, and we'll see what they do in the draft. But I'd say the roster is better. The coaching staff, to be determined.
Okay, so let me ask you this. Here's a fun thought exercise. Tell me who you think will be, let me phrase it this way. What team in the AFC East will need a new head coach first out of the four?
I will say that it will be the New York Jets, I think. Although it's either the New York Jets or the Miami Dolphins. We're hearing a lot of Tom Brady, Derek Jeter, Miami Dolphins
How about
noise. And that Sean
What's
Payton
that done
was
with your day today? Have you been following that?
I've just been sort of following it in the background, and kind of keeping tabs on it. But
You think it's legit?
I think it's interesting noise because I have very little knowledge of whether it's legit, but I think the way those teams churn through coaches leads me to believe one of those teams. I wouldn't be surprised if, things don't go well in Miami and they're looking to make a dramatic move. The thing is, Sean Payton is available to coach football right now.
Right.
And he's taken a year off and, assessing his options or whatever else, but he's available come next year. And I think that means anybody who just got a job, especially in organizations that aren't run particularly rationally all the time and they make snap decisions like the Miami Dolphins, I would say I wouldn't be super comfortable if I were Mike McDaniel sitting down there. I wouldn't feel like I have, the longest runway to screw things up, especially when you make a trade for Tyreek Hill. You've got a quarterback who's, in his third season. That's the type of job where you need to win. Now, the right guy has to be available. I think it is kind of funny to sit here and say that the Bills and Patriots are probably still hanging on to their coaches a lot longer than the other two teams in the division. I just think it's the safe bet because those two teams go through coaches a lot. That's what they do. And until they win, they're going to keep going through coaches. And I think in some ways, Sean McDermott and Bill Belichick they're under pressure in some similar ways, in a similar timetable, where I don't think either one is coaching for his job in 2022. But I think both of them have different things to prove. Sean McDermott needs to get that ultimate prize and get his team at least to the Super Bowl, I think, within the next few years, or the heat really turns up. And I think Bill Belichick needs to show, in whatever form this takes, show that this team, as he's building it now, is going to be a factor in the AFC with Mac Jones as its quarterback and with him as the head coach, frankly, because I think he could coach another 10 years if things are going well. I think, physically he's up to it, but there were some comments at the owners' meetings that made you wonder whether Robert Kraft is hoping for them to make some noise this year. So I think both those guys are safe for now, and I can't say the same about the Jets and Dolphins coaches, because until you win, until you've proven anything, which I don't think either of those guys have, then you can't feel too comfortable.
What kind of way are Patriots fans feeling about Bill Belichick these days, given their lack of activity so far this offseason?
I think people are skeptical of what's going on because
And we would say people. I'm talking about fans, not
fans.
media or anything.
Well,
I
yeah,
wanna know, like,
there's a
what's
lot
the
of
pulse
skeptical
New England?
media. There's a lot of skeptical media. Dan Orlovsky was yelling on ESPN the other day about how the biggest concern in the NFL is what the Patriots are doing with their offensive coaching staff and whether they're supporting Mac Jones enough, because he doesn't have that guy.
Not what's happening with the Washington Commanders.
No, not, even if you're talking strictly from a football standpoint, I think it's
Right.
an egregious statement to suggest that. You were just talking about the voices that Josh Allen has in his ear, and Dan Orlovsky was saying it's so important for that quarterback to have that guy he can talk ball with, and Josh McDaniels is gone, and all this. And I was like, Bill's still there. He's a pretty good guy to talk ball with, I would assume. Not a bad guy to have. He does his weekly meetings with the quarterbacks. Always did it with Brady. I'd say he's a decent guy to have. Yes, have your concerns over Joe Judge, Matt Patricia, whoever else has their hands in the cookie jar on offense, but let's not act as if Mac Jones is completely being hung out to dry. But that is a hot topic. It's been a hot topic, I'd say, on sports talk radio. You kind of have to filter, when you're kind of trying to get the temperature of the air from a fan base as large as this one. There's, Twitter, there's sports talk radio, and then there's probably a lot of quiet people out there that are just saying, in Bill we trust. This is the guy that gets it done. I don't need to know his plan. I just know that it'll probably work because that's the way he's done it for so long. But there are a lot of people wondering, like, what the hell is Joe Judge and Matt Patricia doing? Why is he dropping those names when he's talking about his offensive staff? And, why aren't they doing anything, to move around some money? The idea that they didn't have money. Yes, they didn't have cap space as it was constructed, but we've seen how easy it is to move around money. That's not exactly a good excuse for not doing anything. I think they viewed it as they spent a lot. They spent 2 years worth of money last year, and they think they're going to get more out of some of the guys that didn't play particularly well. But I'd say there's a fair amount of people. Jonnu Smith was terrible. He was useless. Nelson Aguilar did not play particularly well. I don't think that was all Nelson Aguilar. There's you're dealing with a rookie quarterback, and he's a deep threat, and that's a part of the game that I think takes some time for young quarterbacks. But those are two guys. Henry Anderson was hurt all year, defensive end that they didn't get hardly anything out of. They restructured his contract and brought him back. Otherwise, I'd say their free agent haul was pretty successful. You're not going to bat 1,000 in free agency, but Matt Judon had a good year. He faded at the end of the year, but I thought he was a kind of an instant impact. Hunter Henry was a really solid tight end for them. Became one of Mac Jones's best friends on and off the field. So I thought, overall,
That's nice.
yeah, neighbors. They were, good neighbors. It's good to have a friendly neighbor, and so they think they can get more out of.
They need to become Tutty buddies.
That's kind of what they were.
Take the next step. They need to become Tutty buddies.
They were red zone pals. They were, that was his binky down near the goal line. And they think, hey, Mac Jones takes a big step. That solves a lot of problems, right? I think it's just hard to sit here in March if you're a football fan, March and April, just like Bills fans. You sign Von Miller and, a couple other pieces. You get O.J. Howard and these names that you recognize. Even a name that you recognize as your quarterback's coach. How often does that happen? And you forget all about 13 seconds and how the season ended, and you say, hell yeah, let's get after it. Let's strap on the helmet and play some games. And then if you're a Patriots fan, you're sitting there and you're like, they re-signed Nick Folk. They re-signed James White. They bring back Devin McCourty, Matthew Slater. And it's like, well,
those are all very good players, but
all
from a
solid
PR
pieces.
Or a feeling standpoint, it's like, we already know those guys. Give us something new.
Yeah,
It's
like
new.
all the activity brought you back to where you left off, which was getting your ass kicked in the playoffs. So it doesn't feel the same way. But they've, I mentioned this, for those that listen, but talking to people about the Patriots is interesting at these league events compared to talking to people about the Bills a few years ago, because people will openly, especially a couple of years ago, openly poke holes in what's going on with Josh Allen. Oh man, they reached on Josh Allen, or what are they doing here? People are not shy about that. But when it comes to Bill Belichick and you ask other executives or coaches, geez, what do you think's up with this? Like, why don't they have an offensive coordinator? Why don't they have this? And a lot of them kind of clam up, or they just wonder what's up Bill's sleeve. Like, I don't know what he's up to, but he's probably up to something, which is a deserved reputation. But if other, coaches and general managers were doing with their offensive staff what Bill is, heading into a quarterback second season, or, not aggressively adding while the rest of the conference does, I think, people would be poking some holes in it. But they've made a few interesting moves, trading for Devontae Parker, a player that Belichick really likes and has for a while. Bringing back Malcolm Butler was just a very subtle, all of a sudden, people assume that bridge was burned for a long, forever after the way things ended in that Super Bowl, him getting benched. And yet he's back. So if he can play, he didn't even play last year. He was retired. So, maybe that solves the loss of JC Jackson, but there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of questions about, I think the JC Jackson loss is a fine one. And Bills fans probably, Bills fans will, because this is how fans are on the internet. They'll all at once make fun of the Patriots for losing JC Jackson. And then come October, or, last October or last December, make fun of Patriots fans because Stephon Diggs is scorching JC Jackson. So that was always my view of JC Jackson. Was
JC Jackson has a lot of interceptions against Josh Allen.
He did early career Josh Allen.
Yeah.
Once Stephon Diggs entered the picture, that's the thing about JC Jackson that always got me. He had crazy interception numbers, which interceptions are interceptions, but he had, I think, 6 of his interceptions this year came against the Jets and Sam Darnold. I mean, a rookie quarterback in Zach Wilson, he picked him off at least 3 times. He picked off Sam Darnold twice. He picked off Trevor Lawrence, picked off Matt Ryan, and I think he picked off Ryan Tannehill late in that game. So not big games.
Playoff quarterbacks in there.
Not big games. And so I think he's a good player, a fine player. I don't think he's like that number 1 lockdown corner that Stephon Gilmore was. And that's what's interesting about the way the Patriots do business. I don't think Bill Belichick really cares about losing a guy that goes over the price that he thinks is worth it. And
let's cross over there, because the Bills still very, very well. And we're talking about defensive backs and replacements. And we didn't talk about this yesterday. So here's a little more fresh content. What are your thoughts on the Jordan Poyer situation, which he changed agents? He hired Drew Rosenhaus. He wants a new deal. He's entering the final year of his contract. There's a euphoria around Bills fans after the Stephon Diggs extension. And then I and a couple other people reported that, Drew Rosenhaus had a statement in which he put his name to. A lot of agents won't do that, but they'll just say, hey, sources say so-and-so wants a new contract. Drew Rosenhaus, a fairly innocuous quote that says, we've approached the Bills about a contract extension, and Jordan very much wants to finish his career with the Buffalo Bills. And there is a surprising number of fans who are just saying, see you, dude. Hey, it was nice knowing you. Tough shit, because whatever reason he hasn't struck a chord with the fans, but Stephon Diggs, give him all the money. And obviously he's an elite player, and he's Josh Allen's number 1 target, and he helps make that offense go.
And they're
I just think it's funny how the line is drawn of, hey, we love these guys. But as soon as somebody seems to be going against the team, I mean, shouldn't the fans be saying, find a way to pay Jordan Poyer? I mean, but it seems like there's a line drawn somewhere of, we like him, we could do without you. And I don't know if that's a defensive back thing or just defensive football in general, but I don't know what the replacement value would be of player X over an all-pro safety in Jordan Poyer.
Yeah, I think the safety situation was one that I was following pretty closely, before I left the beat, just because they were getting up there. They've been getting up there in age, and they're still playing.
You have to go here, Matt, by the way. I just realized what time it is.
Oh no, when I said between 2 and 4, I meant starting at 4.
Oh, okay.
So I've got good
All right.
runway here. But both of those guys have been getting up there in age. They're still playing really well. They didn't play that great in the final moments of that Chiefs game, but that, notwithstanding, it's a disappointing reality of the way fans behave, in that they will always put the laundry first, it seems, instead of the human beings in it. And
in most cases,
not all, but in a lot of cases. And I don't think Jordan Poyer has really made any wrong steps. I know his wife was very vocally opposed to the vaccine and, was riling a lot of people up on Twitter, but I don't think Jordan himself has made, wrong moves in terms of not winning over the fan base.
He
but
was
I do
vaccinated.
think,
And from what I understand from reliable sources, so was his wife.
And he was pretty quiet about the whole thing himself. And, how his wife behaves on Twitter is, I understand why that would bleed into how people feel about the player, but it is interesting that, I think they've reached a point as a team where fans feel like, hey, get on board or see you later, because there's guys that'll take a discount. There's, there were those reports right before free agency. I think it was Albert Breer said a couple of big name players have reached out to the Bills. They really want to play. That stuff gets Buffalo fans real charged up. And if you want that new contract and the Bills it doesn't work for the Bills cap, and the cap comes first because they want that Super Bowl, and that's just how it is. So I do wonder how the defense would look. And it's going to be a reality they have to face, whether Jordan Poyer gets sent off or not, because he and Micah Hyde are both getting a little bit older. How does that defense look without those two? Because they make a lot of stuff work in terms of how they disguise coverage, what they're able to do, the way they communicate. They are big time leaders in that locker room. So
the problems that they have in terms of depth at cornerback. It's an obvious need, even if you were to assume that you can't assume. Let's say in fantasy land that Tre'Davious White is 100% healthy on opening day. They still need cornerback help, and he's coming off of a bad knee injury that happened late in the season on Thanksgiving. So they talk about it being a year-long recovery process for those types of surgeries. The safeties are going to be crucial. The fact that they have Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer back there to lean on to help get them through, hopefully not having as strong of cornerback play as they'd like, is probably paramount at the moment. Just to say, see you later, Jordan Poyer is probably not the savviest take if you're a Bills fan.
I think the safety position in general is probably not, the most valuable to a defense, but that specific defense, it feels like the most valuable spot because that's how they built it. I think you have to pay attention to actions when it comes to, all these coaches will say it probably because they're on autopilot that they want to build from inside out, start in the trenches and build from inside out. The Bills did the opposite. Sean McDermott got there and he signed Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer, and with his first draft pick, drafted Tre'Davious White. He built from the back forward, and I think that's by design. And a lot of what they've been able to do defensively has been because of those two players. A lot of the reason why, in those last two games, they made Mac Jones, struggle, and they do the same with a lot of young quarterbacks, is because of how they disguise coverages. And the years those guys have playing with one another is a big part of that. So could they replace them? Absolutely. Could you go and draft a safety in the first couple of rounds? But as we've seen with other positions, simply throwing draft picks at it doesn't fix the problem. Defensive end, they've been throwing draft picks at the last couple of years, and still they felt they needed to go get Von Miller because the results weren't there quick enough. And I think the amount of reps you need to play the way that Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer do on the back end of that defense, can't be understated. And as we sit here and talk this through, I'm thinking Drew Rosenhaus and Jordan Poyer are in a pretty good spot here, because what are the Bills going to do if Jordan Poyer decides he wants to hold out, or, he doesn't have all the leverage, because I don't know if, training camp holdouts are a lot more rare than they used to be. The fines can add up pretty quickly, but there is a bit of player empowerment happening across the league. And if Jordan Poyer wants to really press the issue, which he hasn't done yet, but he's got a powerful agent and he wants a new deal. Those are the first two steps. And if the Bills can find a way to make it work, that's in their best interest in 2022 and probably 2023. But Poyer's got a little bit of leverage here, because I don't know how you replace that guy immediately in that defense.
I sidetracked you from you're finishing up with some thoughts on the Patriots when I wanted to go into our little breakout session regarding safeties and whether or not they are, or defensive backs, and whether or not they are as interchangeable or replaceable. So we were talking about J.C. Jackson, and then you were going to talk about something else.
Yeah, I just didn't feel like J.C. Jackson was the massive loss that people have. He's only such a massive loss insofar as we don't know exactly how the Patriots are going to replace him, other than Malcolm Butler and Terrence Mitchell, two big question marks, maybe a draft pick, and see where it goes. But I didn't think it was like a Stephon Gilmore level player for them. A good player to have, no doubt, just not quite that lockdown guy. And I think they felt that way for a long time. And once J.C. Jackson had the stats to ask for that money and hit the market, they were fine letting him walk, and really holding the line. That's what we were talking about that led us to that Poyer conversation, was holding the line on the value of a player and the willingness to get rid of a guy a year early. Or that's been a thing with Bill Belichick. I did a big story on Logan Mankins earlier this offseason, and one of Bill Belichick's most famous get rid of a guy a year too early rather than a year or two too late. I mean, Mankins might have been one of the only players to really go toe-to-toe with Belichick and get a contract earlier in his career. And then, because he held out and really, stood his ground.
Deep into the season.
Yeah, he was.
This wasn't just a training camp holdout. This was in week 10.
And eventually got his deal, which, I think speaks a lot to Mankins, how Belichick felt about him, and also just his personality. He wasn't screwing around, with anything that he did, including, his business. So that's just been a common trait Belichick's had. And I think there's, legitimate question about, when you don't have the greatest quarterback of all time, how much can you afford to do that? And, the Bills have not really taken that approach to this point in Brandon Beane's tenure. They take care of, everybody that needs taken care of with market level deals. I know it's popular to, anytime the Bills do anything. I texted friend of the show, Joe B. I think it was last week when
Joe Biscaglia, for people who don't follow.
I feel like
I don't
Joe
think
B. I think people wouldn't recognize him.
Follows either of us that don't follow Joe. I don't think.
Well, I was going to say, if we called him Joe Biscaglia, I feel like people wouldn't know who we were talking about. You need to call him Joe B. If they hear me talk about Joe Biscaglia, Chris Baker might think I'm talking about our golf buddy, who's a completely separate human, which is funny. Multiple Joe Biscaglias, but I think they converted some of Ryan Bates's money, or they did something that Joe tweeted about. And, the response anytime the Bills do anything, which is great for Brandon, because he's like I said, really good general manager, and he's a great guy too. But anytime that he does anything, they'll make a draft pick in the third round, and it'll be, there he is, the wizard. He's at it again, and
right.
Joe had a tweet that was like, well, this is pretty standard practice. Like, converting this money was not some sort of wizardry. It was just kind of a thing that general managers do. But, Brandon's great, but let's tone it down with the wizard comments. Anytime they, sign an extension, I mean, Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, Tre'Davious White, these are market level deals. They got in a little bit early and the market went up. So savvy, smart, not magical, signing Von Miller to that deal, not not exactly wizardry. It was just, spending a lot of money and having
Sunglasses meme.
yes, the glasses, I'm sure
We used
he
to
gets
see
a
those
kick
for
out of
Doug
it.
Whaley.
Right. Yeah, this guy's not messing around. He looked like, he was from the Matrix. He was certainly operating in a different universe at times when he was building that roster. But I think,
How about that? Wait, let's stop on Doug Whaley for a second. How about in 24 hours, he went from saying, "Hey, the Bills are going to have to consider shopping Stephon Diggs. They can't afford him," to, "No, he's going to probably retire as a Buffalo Bill in the span." I mean, could that have happened because you know that the deal's close. And then all of a sudden, Doug Whaley makes those comments wherever he did on a podcast, or I'm not sure where it was, but it became a blog item. It was on Pro Football Talk, I think, and different, the local media outlets picked it up as a story, and the Bills had to just be giggling, if not pissing their pants in laughter, because they knew that they were on the verge of making this deal, and here's their former doofus general manager talking about how they might need to trade the guy.
Yeah, it's not as if Brandon Bean woke up the next day and was like, you know what, you're right. I hadn't thought about that. I better call, Adisa Bakari and hammer this thing out. It was tough for Doug, as he's trying to break into the,
it's been a tough April for Doug.
The hot take game and the analysis and opinion game. And I like Doug. I do. I think he's loose. It's fun to see the Doug Whaley without the pressure of the GM job and the pressure of Scott Berchtold, making him so afraid of us that he really wasn't himself. It's nice after
that is an aspect of, you're absolutely right.
Now that he's beyond that, I've talked to him a few times and have really enjoyed those conversations. But it was that was a tough one for him. He I think has the chops to make it in this, and he's going to have to learn that these things are going to happen. You're going to have a take, and it's going to look silly. You just got to move on to the next take.
Trying to think like who's a hot taker that, well, you don't even want a hot taker, because some hot takers are like fake it till you make it. They don't have the background. But I'm trying to think of like Bill Polian. Here's a Hall of Famer. I mean, the guy eventually got knocked off of ESPN. He had so many. Chad Kelly's the best quarterback in that draft class. Lamar Jackson isn't a quarterback at all. Oh, he had a bunch of doozies. We were going to draft Tom Brady, even though we already had Peyton Manning. The bullshit.
Yeah, the revisionist history, a lot of those guys. I mean, look, if you're gonna,
he's a Hall of Famer,
Yeah, I was texting somebody about him the other day.
Doug Whaley can have a hiccup when he's given an analysis off the cuff.
And it was a small hiccup, I think, it was fun. It was, if anything, it was, like you said, probably fun for the front office to giggle at, as they knew that the deal was already at the finish line. It was really fun.
It adds to the legend of Brandon Bean.
Oh, the wizard.
And you know what? When Doug Whaley said what he said, people weren't laughing at like Bills fans. There were a lot of people who obviously took it with enough gravitas that it became reported around. It was kind of like, maybe it is something to consider. It's just unfortunate twist.
Yeah, it was more, he just had a stronger version of what I think everybody else was thinking, which was, wow, all these receivers, Stephon Diggs' turn is coming up. He's extremely underpaid. I wonder what he was essentially saying, I wonder what's going to happen here, right? Like, you might have to move him if he wants to pull the same thing. I don't think he was saying there's no way they're ever going to be able to sign him, and they better trade him now before, things get ugly. I think he was more so saying, man, like, he's next one way or the other, whether you move him or pay him, like, somebody's got to pay him because he's way underpaid. And this is the off season of the receiver. And, it gets spun and, the headline, it was just funny that it happened like 24 hours after he's saying, geez, this is one to watch. Look out. Like, they might have to get rid of this guy. It's kind of like the people that, say like, oh man, Sean McDermott might be under the gun without realizing there's no way, you know, they don't know how Stephon Diggs feels about being in Buffalo, how he feels about the organization. Just like a lot of people don't quite understand the psychological dynamic, between Terry Pagula and Sean McDermott, and how, the Pagulas feel about him. It can be easy to sit on the outside and think, man, he could pull a Tyreek Hill, because look, in fairness, if he had said the same thing about Tyreek Hill 24 hours before the Tyreek Hill trade, people would have said, you're out of your mind. And then all of a sudden that trade came down. Nobody saw it coming. So I think it's a tough one for Doug. He's an easy punching bag on Twitter, and that one made it pretty easy for those that like to get after him.
Hey, before we talk about Sabres goaltending prospect Devon Levi and whatever other hockey you want to talk about, Matt, I want to let everybody know that you can watch all of the basketball, football, baseball, hockey, all the golf, all that stuff, whatever you want to wager on, in fact, anything that's bettable, which in the state of New York has been rather easy and prolific these days. You want to go to a place that has a ton of TVs, and that's Amherst Pizza and Ale House at 55 Cross Point Parkway in Gettsville. That's right off of Millersport Highway in the 990. Amherst Pizza and Ale House. TVs in of doors, out of doors. Get out there on that patio as the temperatures climb into the 70s here. Have a beer, smell the breeze, lose $25 on the Knicks. Recognized by ESPN.com as Western New York's top spot to watch sports. A lot of energy in there. One of my all-time favorite places. Stop in or call for takeout and delivery, 716-625-7100. 716-625-7100. Amherst Pizza and Ale House.
That's a Gronk favorite, isn't it?
I'm sorry, Matthew?
That's a Gronk favorite, isn't it? The Amherst Pizza and Ale House.
When Goose had his draft party, and he ended up not getting drafted, but that's where everybody ended up, was at Amherst Pizza and Ale House. All the Gronk brothers. A lot of the Gronks have dispersed, I've learned. They have homes hither and yon, and they don't necessarily, they have the house that they grew up in, they still have, and they sometimes pass through, but a couple of them are living in Texas and down in Florida, and I think there's only one brother who's still in Western New York. But I want to talk
adventurous group. Let's do it.
One thing I learned yesterday that I did not know is that you have insight, or at least you've been able to evaluate with your own eyes, Sabres goaltending prospect Devon Levi at Northeastern. He was, of course, acquired in that Sam Reinhart trade from the Florida Panthers. 7th-round draft pick, and you think, what's the big deal with the 7th-round draft pick? But that's what happens with goalies. There's a long developmental road for them. But I found it interesting. Sabres fans were somewhat upset that that Devon Levi decided to go back to Northeastern. But what are your thoughts on him? As somebody who's played the position, you went and seen him. What do you think on this Devon Levi and his decision to stay in the NCAA?
Yeah, I think people were overreacting a little bit. They were putting their defenses up, wondering this guy doesn't want to play in Buffalo, and he's trying to ride it out and take off for somewhere else in free agency, as college players can do, and maybe he'll do that. I don't know. I have no inside info one way or the other on what he'll do, but he does not sound like somebody who is doing this for that reason. He seems like I really enjoyed watching him. I went to their regular season finale against Merrimack College. It was at Merrimack College, senior night for them. Nice little environment at that barn. One of my favorite things about being back in this area is the Hockey East, and just like seeing those games on TV all the time, being in those rinks. There's something about being in a small rink, even if there's only 3,000-4,000 people in it, that feels like home in a lot of ways. And it was a
What
pretty
other rinks did
rowdy.
you get to? Did you?
That was the only one
Get
this
out and
year.
about?
We were going to go to Northeastern, but for a while they weren't allowing fans. My dad went to Northeastern. My mom went to Northeastern. So, and the Frozen Four was here, but I wasn't able to get there. We had some family in town, but so we had that one circled on the calendar because Merrimack College is real close to where I grew up, and Northeastern, as I mentioned, is a family school. So, but we have divided interests in the Hockey East because my sister went to UMass. I like Merrimack because I played in that rink a bunch growing up. So not the best year for Hockey East, but that game in particular ended up, I've got the tickets for Christmas for my dad and my sister and me to go to the game just because of convenience. It was close and it was Northeastern. Ended up being the whole Hockey East was on the line. If Northeastern won, they were going to win the regular season title. And it was one of those hectic games, scoreless basically the whole way through. And Northeastern got a last second goal to win it. But I was texting, Chris Baker before I went, like, who else do I got to watch besides Levi? But mostly my dad and I, it doesn't matter who's playing. We're watching the goalies. Considering I played growing up, we've just always, focused on the goalies. And Levi is really interesting to watch because he, you don't see it on TV, but during the TV timeouts, he like skates out of his crease, like 10 feet, turns around, faces the goal, does some sort of meditation routine. He has a lot of goalies have their particular routines, but I've never quite seen a guy like kneel down and like meditate between TV timeouts. He's extremely, extremely calm. And I say all that to say this seems like the type of guy that is very methodical and well thought out in his decisions. And, Kevin Adams mentioned that Devon told him he wanted to have a season where everybody was paying attention. Not that he came out of nowhere this year, but the season that he had was pretty remarkable for Northeastern. He carried them and had a ton of shutouts. Yeah, he was a star for them. They wouldn't win the Hockey East or get anywhere near where they did without him. And now he's going to have that pressure ramped up even more where everybody's watching him and people are talking about him. He's probably going to be in the Hobie Baker conversation, the whole thing. I thought that was a pretty interesting reason for wanting to come back. One of many, I'm sure. I think probably enjoys being in college. Forget that some of these kids, their college experience hasn't exactly been the normal college experience given the pandemic and everything else that came along with it. So I wouldn't necessarily panic. Had the conversation with Chris Baker because he knows better than I do about how these things go. And I thought he's an interesting case because he's not Portillo's the goalie from Michigan, right? The big kid, who is one who probably needs a little bit more like of the technical seasoning, longer road development because he's a big, talented, higher draft pick. Whereas Levi is a little smaller, already really sharp technically, clearly, mentally, has extreme focus, extreme calm. So you wonder, is it time for him to just make the jump? What more can he gain? But I think what he mentioned is exactly what he has to gain, feeling that pressure. And it might be more intense there than it will be in the AHL because you have the organizational pressure and the pressure of the fact that your dream is on the line when you're in the AHL. But from an atmosphere standpoint and from a pressure of carrying your team, Hockey East is probably going to give you a little bit more of that. The Bean Pot, the Frozen Four, the whole thing.
Taking a bus ride from Rochester to Albany or whatever.
Even the AHL playoffs, you got to really hunt to find those on TV, whereas the Hockey East playoffs are, on television here locally. They're actually now going to be on ESPN Plus next year. And, same with the NCAA tournament ends up on major broadcasts with ESPN. So you arguably have more eyes on you, I think, staying in college hockey. And as a goalie, it's one of those positions where it is going to take some time. And I don't think there's an exact right or wrong way to do it, but you don't just draft a kid and throw him into the crease in the NHL. You're talking 2 years down the road where maybe this kid, 2-3 years down the road where maybe you can get him into your NHL net. It's a trickier thing. And I give Kevin Adams a lot of credit for having the approach that he does, because the other part of it is that you do need to manage those relationships with these kids. You know, it's so much different than football where you draft a guy and he's got no choice. He's yours for 4 years at least. In the NHL, you got to manage these relationships and make it a place that he wants to be, make it a place that he trusts is right for his development. And part of that is trusting a guy who clearly understands what he needs mentally, emotionally, better than a lot of kids his age, it seems like, and trusting that he, you know, can make the right decision for himself. So much ado about.
Well, he's a part-time monk.
Yeah, basically. I mean, as I saw him do that, I thought, man, who knows where I could have gone if somebody would have taught me to do that when I was, you know, well, not even 20. By the time I was 20, I was long washed up. But, you know, 16 years old, maybe I could have been Devon Levi. Probably not. But, you know, I think he's going to be
at least
all right.
Played for the Tibetan national team.
Perhaps I would have had to have jumped through some hoops, I think, to make that work. But I think he's going to be fine. I think it's going to be all right. I think people should take a deep breath, and they do have a goalie problem in you know, the Sabres. If they're going to turn this hot little run into you know, some positive momentum next season, I think goaltender is a question mark. And it's probably a long-term one, depending on how all these prospects work out. But it is a tricky position. And I think, you know, Devon Levi seems pretty mature about how he's handling it all. And yeah, the Michigan goalie is probably one to worry about, because it sounds like next year he could leave if he wanted to, but he might also be looking at Devon Levi and saying, well, geez, like that guy might be better than, you know, that guy might, you know, steal some of my ice time if I go to Rochester. So I think he had a chance to get a jump start on Devon Levi, but he probably also recognizes that could be a problem for him. It could be a crowded crease. And so that, you know, is a situation to keep an eye on, but I wouldn't panic about Devon Levi. And I was texting with Baker weeks before, you know, it was still the regular season, and saying, you know, people seem to think this is a foregone conclusion that he's gone, but I just don't understand that. You know, he's only really had one full college season here, like, you know, and Chris was, you know, kind of thinking the same thing, that it was 50-50 on what was going to happen. And I don't think it's a bad thing for his development.
Matthew, any other Sabres takes?
I've been watching a decent amount of Sabres. They caught my attention. That Jack Eichel game, you know, I had to tune in for that, because
it's a good time to start watching them, because although they did maybe hit a little turbulence, the excitement's been picking up. And yes, they've had their collapses. They can't seem to close out a game here and there, but in general, you can feel a future is bright, or a future is bright seems a little too optimistic, but the future is,
there is a future.
Okay.
There's
okay.
A future.
Yeah.
You know, there's
It's
something
not desolate.
happening. You know, here we go with another free ESPN Plus plug, but the ESPN Plus has been a nice little way to, you know, watch the whole league and, you know, stay plugged in. And I had to watch that Jack Eichel game, because Jack Eichel got to Buffalo like 8 months after I did, I think. So like the whole Jack Eichel run, and he left like a couple months after I did. So we were kind of on a similar timetable there. And just a fascinating Buffalo sports story, I thought, and it didn't disappoint. That night was had lots of fireworks. It was a memorable night for a lot of people. And so then my curiosity was piqued. Like, did they catch lightning in a bottle that night, or
Tim Graham
like,
covered that game for the
Athletic? He did. Well, that was, you know, part of why I was glued to it. I was like, man, Tim Graham is back on the beat here for a night. I got to see what this is about. And you know, I was like, you know, maybe they'll turn it into something. And, you know, they've been, I think it is we talked so many times on the podcast about what it would take to get people back interested. It seemed like we would have Chris Baker on and say, what is there to look forward to for Sabres fans? And, he would get creative with it, but a lot of times, it was grasping at straws.
They got to hit on these draft picks that are coming
that
up.
are
Next
in
year's
2 or
draft
3
picks.
years. Yeah, that'll then reach the NHL in 2 years. But I think it goes to show you how quickly things can change. How quickly
that's ironic to say how quickly things could change as they're entering their, as they're in a decade of
sure,
playoff
but
appearances.
How quickly the feeling can change.
Oh, I see the feeling.
Of hitting this record long drought, which a year ago would have been, they were reaching just complete, people just did not care. They had no feeling one way or the other about the Sabres. They weren't mad at them, and they weren't excited when they drafted players. They had the number 1 pick, and it seemed like nobody cared. And the attendance reflected that. I was watching a few games earlier in the year thinking, man, nobody is in this building. Like, nobody cares about this team. And that can spiral on you if you're an owner and you're a team and they seem to have drawn people back in for the first time in a long time, probably since, I think Jack Eichel was a little over the top in his, loudest I've ever heard it here. Yeah, really.
The Rick Jeanneret tribute came at a nice time also.
They built up that positive momentum.
Feel something again. They win the game. It was, I think
they're capitalizing on the moment. They had Jack Eichel in town. So it's like, all right, people are going to show up and people are going to watch, and they won. And Rick Jeanneret had his night, and they sold the place out for the first time all year, first time in many, many months, and they won. They're capitalizing on moments, and I think it actually matters when you're a young team figuring things out. Look, I don't know that the process to get to this point was perfect. The whole, let's get rid of some scouts and just video scout. Let's hire the guy that's sitting next to me to be the general manager, because, they were cutting costs during the pandemic. They hire their interim coach. They hire a general manager that had a lot of people scratching their heads. But at every turn, publicly in his comments, I've been impressed with Kevin Adams for a guy that, didn't come up the same way and have kind of all the training to be, in front of a camera. And I know he was a player, so it's not like it's completely foreign to him, but I feel like he's been impressive, and, he's made some good moves. So he's got him. There is a future, whether it's bright or not, depends on a lot of different factors, but it's cool to see from afar. People get excited about the sport again, because seeing that building empty was a little jarring there for a while, because, hockey heaven and all that. There are, being here, much bigger market in Boston, but, that place is full all the time. And the Bruins have been really good for a long time. But even, watching games around the league, it's not as if hockey attendance as a whole is in a bad spot. And Buffalo is supposed to be a strong market. Fans let them know that, they were checked out until further notice. And Jack Eichel, brought him back in. I guess people were really sad that he was gone or something, according to Jack. But really,
yeah,
that's been getting a lot of play around our house. It was the perfect response. I loved I immediately, I was only half paying attention to the TV, and my head snapped around. I was like, I need to rewind this. Did he just say what I think he said? And I love it, because I don't know, it makes people feel things. That's what, you want out of sports. And so he just said, you know what, in that moment, snap second, said, I'm going to be the villain now. I'm just going to go for it. Why not? I'm already the villain, clearly. So why not just
you need
lean
villains
into
in
it?
sports. And when you're awful for so long, it's hard to have a villain, unless it's a Tom Brady where the guy's cleat is constantly on your throat. But if you're a Sabres fan over the last 10 years, who's your villain? You're still going back to Chara and, all that shit from when the team was relevant. But the team's been bad for so long, they really haven't even had any bad guys. There haven't been any. There's nobody to be upset at. You're just so miserable about your team that you shrug and hope people don't hurt you too badly.
Right. All the villains were guys that were on their own team, like Billy
Ryan
Leno
O'Reilly
and, so
whomever.
Billy
Ristolainen.
Leno, Ristolainen. I mean, it was those guys.
Did you
And
say Billy Leno? Does that mean you said? Yeah. Ehrhoff.
I mean, the owner was the villain for the long
He
time.
got booed at Jenneret's farewell game.
So, I mean, Russ Brandon was sort of a villain there for a while. He had a hand in the Sabres a bit. So it's fitting too, because, of course, all the comments are like, oh man, typical Boston punk. It's a guy. It has to be a guy from Boston is the villain. For Sabres fans after Tom Brady beat him up for so long. And
in football, it's a Californian, and
right
for hockey, it's a Massachusetts.
The coastal elites, and I just found it entertaining. It was something that got people talking about the NHL and people talking about the Sabres and got people fired up, which is.
It reminds me, Matthew, you were talking about the coastal aspect of it. And I don't know if you really experienced this too much. I'm trying to think if it maybe, but there was a time where Bills fans wanted nothing to do with a California quarterback. That's Trent Edwards. But it goes back to they just don't work. Rob Johnson. We don't want these California quarterbacks.
JP Lossman was a beach kid, right?
Yes.
He went to Tulane, but he was originally a California kid.
Yeah, but there was this vibe, that was going around Western New York for a long time in the early 2000s. And you'd hear it spoken on WGR where a quarterback's name would come up and for the draft, and it would be like, nah, man, California quarterbacks, nope, like non-starter, nope, they're no good. They can't handle it here. Well,
yeah, Aaron Rodgers wouldn't have been able to hack it in Buffalo. He only made it work in Green Bay, and it is funny that they ended up with a California quarterback in Josh Allen. But I do think a big part of his arc and the way people love him is his origin story of, he's a California guy, but he's a farm guy. He's not a beach guy. He's a farm guy. It's like Logan Mankins was a California farm guy. Not, you don't think of the California farm guys as the same as you do the guys from Orange County.
What's the word I'm looking for? It's the turn. It's not counterintuitive. It's not the counterbalance. But it's similar to that whole. He's a quarterback who just happens to play, or he's a linebacker who happens to play quarterback, which was the Jim Kelly thing. There's this duality of he's not what he seems. He's us. He's us.
Yeah, he's got that blue collar vibe. He's got that toughness, and it's all panned out for Josh Allen. It has been like the perfect marriage.
The dichotomy, I guess, is the word I'm looking for. I don't even think that's the exact word I'm looking for, but
he's been the perfect type of quarterback to be, in Buffalo from a personality standpoint. The exact type of guy that fans fall in love with, regardless of what position
nowhere
they
near
play.
A beach. I mean, he would have had to drive hours to get to a beach.
No, it's not a concocted.
Up on a farm and ends up, in the Rocky Mountains, slinging it at altitude, mile high, a mile and a half up in the mountains in Laramie.
Yeah, it's not a made up, constructed narrative. It is his origin story. It is him. And now he spends a lot of time in LA and on the beach. But when you sign a $250 million contract, I think all of us would have a couple of homes and probably pick some of them near the water.
I'm not buying in Fresno if I ever become a multimillionaire.
No, and I think anybody in Buffalo, who loves Buffalo, I include myself in that group. If I had millions of dollars, I would still have a home in Buffalo, and then I would go, have another home somewhere else when it's freezing cold and snowing. I mean, if you have the money to do it and the flexibility and the freedom in your career of choice, which Josh Allen does, I don't think anybody faults him for that. But he has been the perfect kind of guy. I find it interesting the difference between Josh Allen and Jack Eichel and how people felt about them. A lot of it, I think, is just success. If the Sabres were good, then people would have loved Jack Eichel the same way. And he, would have loved Buffalo. Josh Allen got good and the team got good. And, and his personality meshed. I think a lot of people want to extrapolate and say, no, it actually starts with the personality. Because of Josh's personality,
Right.
That's why the Bills got good, and that's why he got good. And because Jack is an asshole, that's why the Sabres weren't good, and that's why he wasn't that good, and that's why we didn't like him. Maybe. I think there was probably, people that would tell you he wasn't the best in the locker room. Jack, wasn't the best leader, wasn't this or that. But also at 18 years old, he got propped into a situation where he had to be. And
he was bigger than the franchise before he even put on the sweater.
Right. So I have a little bit more. I don't
mean that as his attitude of being that, but the Sabres, by definition of throwing away 2 seasons to get him, insisted upon the world that this kid was more important than 2 full seasons. He's bigger than anybody here. Yeah,
and he jumps into the lineup right away. He's the captain, probably way earlier than he should have been. Maybe he never should have been. And so I don't fully blame Jack Eichel for perhaps not handling himself the best when he was 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. That's a young age to be thrown into a messy, already toxic situation with a franchise that was struggling. So who knows? Maybe their personalities had something to do with it, because Josh Allen got thrown into a franchise that to that point was pretty lousy, but had already established a little bit of a foundation of competing without him. Sean McDermott got the team to the playoffs and made it pretty clear. I don't know, that is kind of an interesting juxtaposition with the 2 teams. Is like one guy came in and tried to win and it worked. Right after the tank clearly hadn't worked. It was like the Bills just pressed all the right buttons. It's kind of like, it's like the Pagulas are playing 2 hands in poker. They tried them both, and they're like, all right, we'll press these buttons with the Sabres. That didn't work. I guess we'll try these ones with the Bills, and, we're bound to get one of them right. And it worked out.
Matthew, it seems as though we could do this every day.
We could.
Virtually without commercial interruption. Imagine how easier it would be if we had commercials every 20 minutes. We could
That's true.
If we had a producer and, had some guests calling in.
Sounds like you might be onto something.
Something to think about. I appreciate you putting up with this 2 days in a row.
I appreciate you having me 2 days in a row. People seem to listen. I realized that I accidentally mentioned Blaine Gabbert on the last podcast and somebody caught it. I didn't even catch it. That's how I think it was naturally it comes to me.
Jonah Javad mentioned Blaine Gabbert, I think.
I did when we were talking about Tom Brady, but Jonah might have too.
Oh, you did. That's right.
But I didn't even do it on purpose.
That was not early in the news in the podcast either. So somebody endured that steaming pile that I posted online yesterday. The conversation was great. I enjoyed it. I haven't spoken to Jonah in months. I loved it. And I was pissed the hell off when I listened back to it when I was producing it. So here we are again.
This is why you need a producer.
This is a make good, a do-over, a mulligan. Have a good week.
Hey, right back at you.
Matthew Fairburn of The Athletic. Much love to him, and my thanks to you, the audience, for listening or watching on YouTube. To Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK CPAs and Business Consultants.
CTBK is more than just a full-service accounting firm. They are one team with an innovative approach to accounting and rise to each new challenge with collaborative problem-solving skills. CTBK goes above and beyond by lending helping hands in the Buffalo and Niagara community through volunteer work and donations, and is partnered up with Victory Sports for 2020 and 2021 to keep kids in the community active. The professionals at CTBK are determined to help individuals and businesses succeed. Whether a large corporation, a small business, or somewhere in between, Call CTBK at 716-630-2400. Again, 716-630-2400, and see what CTBK's one-team approach can do for you.